Now to discuss this breaking story, Congressman Adam Schiff, top Democrat on the House Intel Committee. What do you make of this generous offer?
Well, after a very striking couple of days, yet another twist in the road. I think the last thing the president probably needs right now is for Vladimir Putin to be vouching for him. But if Putin is now saying that he has tapes, that, of course, begs even more questions about why the Russians are recording conversations with the U.S. president. All of this just gets more and more baffling every day. But I don't think we should allow it to distract us from the very serious allegation that was contained in the New York Times article yesterday that the president effectively asked Comey to drop a serious investigation involving his first national security advisor, someone who was among his most prominent surrogates during the campaign. That is a very serious charge. We need to get, I think, that memoranda and any other that Director Comey or the FBI may have that outline any conversations with the president about Russia or anything else that the director thought improper. And I do think we ought to have the director come back to Congress and testify in open session as soon as possible.
So if the summons substance is what is suggested by the reporting, then what?
Well, then I think we still have a lot of investigating to do to determine just what the president was asking the FBI director and why. The standard in terms of whether he was actively trying to interfere or impede or obstruct the investigation really goes to the president's intent. And right now we have conflicting accounts from the president and the White House and from those around Director Comey as to what went on in that conversation. That memoranda may be among the best evidence. Probably the director is in a position to fill in some of the information that may not be in that memoranda. But of course, we may find that there are other documents as well, other conversations that shed even further light on the president's motivations. So I don't think we should prejudge it, but right. There's certainly enough that we need to get to the bottom of this.
Well, look, Congressman, while you're providing a nimble legal analysis of this, and I guess you could make a soft assumption that if Comey had memos pointing to real gross obstruction or interference, you think that he would have shared them with the DOJ at some point. But at the end of the day, this won't be a legal matter, right? I mean, the law on indicting a sitting president, for any kind of criminal matter is pretty clear that it's not going to happen, certainly not until after an impeachment process. And that's all about the GOP, sir, with all due respect. They have the numbers. That's a political process. It's about votes, not proof. So do you see anything coming of any of this?
Well, you're right on both points. First, I think one of the things that Director Comey would and should be asked when he comes to testify is not only about the conversations he had with the president, but if he felt that they were of questionable either legality or ethics, why weren't they reported to someone within the Justice Department? So that's an appropriate question to ask the director. In terms of the repercussions, even if there were demonstrable evidence of obstruction, you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, it's a very practical question for the Congress to decide. And I think ultimately what's at stake is whether members of Congress and indeed the country as a whole believe that the president's conduct was corrupt enough, if that's what we would find, that his removal wouldn't be simply the nullification of the election by other means. I think that really is the test. Having prosecuted an impeachment case in the Senate involving a federal judge just a few years ago, I can tell you it's obviously a hugely consequential action. But when you talk about the President of the United States, it's enormously disruptive of the entire country. That's not something to be lightly entertained. I think we follow the evidence, we obtain the evidence, we hear the testimony, and then we decide just what does this show about the president's conduct.
A few quick questions for you. One, do you believe what comes out of the White House?
On the subject of Russia, I don't think we can believe it. Certainly the president has sent so many conflicting messages just within the course of the week. Of course, he had his proxies, his surrogates go out there and lay out a pretextual explanation for why he fired Comey that proved to be completely false. And the very next day, it was the president himself who acknowledged that it was false. So we really can't believe what the president says on this. To have him now potentially in a dispute over what happened between his version and Director Comey's, I think most of the country is probably not going to believe the president's account. But this is why any other evidence is so important, whether it's contemporaneous notes taken by the director or whether it's tapes, as the president suggested, indeed threatened, that he may have.
Do you think that your message to your fellow Democrats at this point should be to back off the impeachment word, that you're nowhere near that?
You know, we're asked about this all the time, so there's no avoiding having to answer the question. But I do think that all of us ought to talk about just what a wrenching experience that would be for the country. That's not something that we should be rushing into or rushing to suggest. I think we need to get to the bottom of what took place. Was the president's intent in doing this? Was he trying to shut down a legitimate prosecution? Was he doing it because ultimately he was worried the trail might lead back to him? These are some profound questions I think we need to answer before we get too far down the path of what are the consequences if the proof turns out to be there.
Your GOP brothers and sisters are starting to talk a little bit more, given the weight of these things, the divulging of highly classified intel to the Russians, firing Comey, now the firing in light of these revelations about what his relationship with Comey may have been vis-a-vis the Russia investigation. You do have more of the GOPers talking about needing to understand what happened, but the idea of even an independent committee, that would take a vote. Do you think that there is any chance that even these hottest allegations of what Comey's memo may or may not say, do you think there's any chance that the GOP leadership would allow an independent commission to look at it?
I do think there's a chance, and I think the pressure just continues to mount on the Speaker to allow that legislation to go forward. You have, I think, just about every day now, additional Republicans adding their voice to the support of either an independent commission or to an independent counsel or to both. And I think when we'll see the commission taken up, the legislation taken up, is when the Speaker concludes that he is better off politically with a commission. He's better off being able to say, okay, we gave it to an independent commission, we did what the public wanted, and 3/4 of the public thinks this is necessary and important, and now can we please talk about tax cuts? Until we get to that point, though, where the GOP leadership decides that their continued obstruction of an independent commission is a political impediment to their other agenda, we're still going to have to fight for this.
Congressman Schiff, thank you for the perspective. Appreciate it.